Good morning, friends. My name is Darren St. George, and welcome to another Monday morning program. If you've been with us before, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to see you. If this is your first time joining us, welcome to the party, because this is how we start each and every week celebrating entertainment's leaders, legends, and icons, and this morning is no exception. We are talking about the Borscht Belt Museum in the Catskill Mountains of New York State. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear them. Please share them in the chat, and I'll happily relay those over to Sal. And speaking of Sal, let's get to the man of the hour. Sal, Dad, are you there?
Where's Bart? Bart around?
Oh, and look at Bart.
I am here.
Hello, Bart.
And nobody's in their pajamas.
I'm in my
I just changed very quickly when I knew you were going to turn it on. You know, Sal, you were asking about the comedy relative to the food, and God knows how much food there was or how many jokes there were.
Oh, yeah.
But I love to quote my good friend Patty Posner DeBouche, who was from the Brickman family, and in her book, she coined a term that was really, you know, what we used to hear all the time. You know, you get somebody at a breakfast or lunch and they would eat themselves silly. It was just unbelievable how much food there was. And they partook of everything liberally. And then they would look at the waiter and say, "Could you give me a little something in the napkin for later?"
Belada. That's
That
right.
was the term, and she would spell it apostrophe Latah. And I always have to say to people when I give a talk about the Catskill that it is not a pornographic term. This relates to food.
You know, that's great. That was Mousy Lawrence's great joke. You know, I spent from the age of 8 all the way on up to the time it closed. I was at Grand Mountain, where my family had an interest in, and then I was a maitre d' at the Aladdin. So I remember this very, very well. It's interesting when they would do the run of the menu, and it was, you know, people had said, well, people would die up. We would get people dying in the dining room, and one of the reasons they died is because they ate too fast of things they shouldn't eat, and they would just literally explode. And Bart does this so beautifully in the book. Meanwhile, Mr. Charlo, it's 20 after 10. Time to get the livestock in.
That's it. Absolutely.
So they were.
I was in my 40s and way out of the Catskills before someone clued me in that livestock was not one word. You know, it's 2 words.
Yeah.
Livestock. And we just accepted it. But I kept wondering, what the hell has this got to do with cattle? I mean, is this like sheep?
Well, was it? You know, what was it? Bart, it was the cattle coming into the dining room.
My God!
Right before the smorgasbord, you know, the charge of the light brigade, or the charge of the food brigade, because you'd said,
"Nice to see you, Peter."
Food was the sidebar is looking at Bart's books. I got to tell you, this is a real horse race, Bart, but I like Pickle Barrel Tales a little bit better.
You did. All right. Good. Wonderful.
It was
but you know, you're allowed to recommend them both, and you can write a review. Could use a review on Pickle Barrel.
You were talking about Patty, which was really noteworthy about Patty, and she doesn't really mention it much. Patty was one of the few female stewards in the Catskills.
That's right.
You know, it was a very, very, particularly the kitchens where the owners kept the eagle eye, because that's really the most expensive part of the operation. But Patty was one of the few, and she knew this stuff. She knew this stuff in, out, up, down. She would eyeball the produce when it came in. When Bart will remember this, when GNS brought the chickens in, she would take a look. That was one of the suppliers. She would watch GNS bring the chickens in, and from like 50 yards away, she'd say, "Don't send me that shit. Send me the good stuff. Send me what I ordered." So the skill set that people learned, and you know, Bart will agree to that. The skill set and the passive learning that took place by just being there is absolutely astonishing. And Patty, you know, I said you really needed to say more about this in your book, because you were a trailblazer. She was a female. She was the boss's daughter. Yes, but you know, most of the time the boss's daughters were the little princesses, but not Patty. Patty was in the kitchen from sunup to sundown. Bart and I were just slaves of the house, but you know, Patty was in the kitchen.
Peter, Bart, could you shed a little light? We have some questions here for someone who isn't familiar with the Borscht Belt. Could you explain a little bit of the history?
Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. In 5 seconds flat.
Oh, we'll give you
Put it this
6.
way.
We'll give you 6.
What I always say is the Catskills are a place on the map that you can visit today, but the Borscht Belt is a place in the heart of those who lived it, and that's the only place you're ever going to get to visit it. It was an era of about 75 years in the history of the New York State Catskill Mountains, where a triangle between or around the cities of Monticello, Liberty, and Ellenville was so chock full of particularly Jewish and Jewish-oriented resorts, bungalows, hotels, all that kind of stuff, that it became very world famous. It was in the 1950s and 60s in its golden age. It was the largest single concentration of resort rooms anywhere in the world. And we had some of the biggest hotels in the world there. But we also had tiny little, cook-a-lanes, little rooming houses and bungalows, and so much of the comedy and entertainment that influenced the United States from the 1930s on up through the 1960s was born in the Catskills and played in the Catskills.
Bart, can you tell us some of the great stars that began in the Catskills?
Oh my God. I have a list of over 160, primarily comedians and, singers, other kind of, variety acts, but also athletes who played in the Catskills. Pretty much anyone you ever knew. If you want, I'll dig up a list and run through. But, anyone from Jack Benny to Bob Dylan, you want to take your pick. The rock era had their time. The swing era had their time. But from the 1920s through I'd say the early 1970s, anyone who was everyone in the entertainment industry came through the Catskills. Many started. For example, at my hotel, Red Buttons and Robert Alda got their start. And Jackie Mason was almost our MC. But we didn't have the biggies, like Sammy Davis Jr. didn't play our stage. I regret to tell you. But anyone you saw on television, anyone you heard on radio, anyone you saw in vaudeville, they all played the Catskills. Pick your name.
One of the very first was Danny Kaye.
Yes, Danny Kaye was very good.
And it crossed all genres. To go back to the idea of the Borscht Belt, the phrase was coined by Abel Green and Milton Blackstone, who were employed by Jenny Grossinger. It was an incredible marketing ploy just to make this particular region around that triangle, which we're going to include Ellenville, so it kind of makes it a trapezoid, if I remember my geometry correctly.
One of my favorite areas up there was at Grossinger's. When you went inside, the walls were lined with 8x10s of all these great celebrities going back, as you said, Bart, from the 20s on, and it was wonderful. I always wondered what happened to all those beautiful 8x10s when they bulldozed the place.
There was a big sale many years ago. In fact, I bought one of those Grossinger's chairs, which, by the way, was absolutely indestructible. Where some of the other hotels had that garish plastic with those strange colors. Grossinger's had the real deal. These were the kind of seats that you could plop into in an attempt to digest, the 54 courses that you just had for lunch. But
can you see this? You wanted to see some of the lists, so if you'll permit me, is that all right?
Of course. Here we go.
So let me get rid of my face on the screen here. So you can read down the list. This is anything but exhaustive, believe me. So let's go down. Joey Adams, Marty Allen, Woody Allen, Maury Amsterdam, B. Arthur, Benny Bell, Richard Belzer, Jack Benny, Gertrude Berg, Milton Berle, Shelley Berman. You want to go from the other end. Henny Youngman, Ed Gwynn, Jonathan Waters, Burt Wheeler, Jackie Wakefield, Jackie Vernon, the Three Stooges. Go right in the middle there. Buddy Hackett, Mickey Katz, Georgie Jessel, Danny Kaye, Alan King. This is just comedians, this list. Okay.
Oh,
and
I don't see Mickey Freeman up there.
Well, as I said, it's not exhaustive. You can send me any names you want. I'll add them to the list. I'm happy to do so. Here are some of the singers and other entertainers. So you got Ames Brothers, Barry Sisters, Carol Channing, Sid Charisse, Perry Como. Go down this list. Bob Dylan, Tiny Tim, Mel Torme, Sophie Tucker, the Simon Sisters, Simon and Garfunkel, Neil Sedaka. I think one of my girlfriends used to babysit for his kids up in the Catskills. And below it, just a few. I don't have any kind of a list of all of the athletes. You got Wilt Chamberlain. Everybody knew that. Sonny Liston, Buster Crabbe. I watched Buster Crabbe teach a kid how to swim in the Concord indoor pool. I mean, all of these folks. Willie Mays, Hank Greenberg is a cousin of mine. So I'm going to stop the share there. But just so you get an idea of how rich an environment this was. And it wasn't even just the entertainment and the athletes. It was also the politicians. So presidents came, first ladies came, senators came, vice presidents came, because if you wanted a vote, and particularly the New York votes, you better show up in the Borscht Belt.
The story of Monticello Raceway is interesting. The Hotelmen's associations up here were so powerful that when they built 17, and those of you who are familiar with the Quickway are familiar with that iconic traffic light at exit 98. So the Parksville Hotelmen's Association had such enormous political strength, as they all did, that here you have this new major route, which is now becoming an interstate. And for years and years, they had a traffic light at exit 98. So you're soaring down the highway at 65 miles an hour, and all of a sudden there's a traffic light. Why? Because the hotels at that point were on both sides. So everybody wanted equal billing. So, of course, we put a traffic light. Scroll to the late 1950s when the state was looking at the approvals for harness racing tracks. So powerful was the Hotelmen's lobby. And again, you had the Slutskys, you had Sid Sussman from the Windsor, Dave Levinson, Rosinger, all kicking in saying this track is a great idea. They broke ground on the track before the legislature approved it. That's how powerful they were. And Bart was correct. We've had presidents up here from Theodore Roosevelt all the way on up.
Yes.
Joke with Lyndon Johnson, the first president to spend a full night here at the Neverly Towers. And when I was a kid, I actually shook his hand. And I said to my father, Pop, he'd make a great professional wrestler. He was this big, tall Texan. The question was, and we're still trying to find this out, Bart, you got to help me or somebody else. What did he have for breakfast the next morning? Did he have Mach's herring? Did he have pickled lox? So you had presidents, you had athletes, you had boxers from Dempsey up until Ali, and they were all accessible.
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther
Yes.
Its speech at the Concord. You had everybody who was anybody here. So when you hear the rhetoric of, oh, well, we're going to build world-class spas, we were already the ultimate destination area in the world.
In the world.
Not just in the United States, in the world.
Yeah, and we ended up really being the model for a lot of other things. Like I always like to say, if you went to a Club Med started out as a bunch of tents on islands in the Mediterranean. When they became these all-inclusive, resorts with, genteel organizateurs, basically tumblers. The model was the Catskills. If you get on a cruise ship today, okay, the model is the Catskills. And if you go to Vegas, okay, Bugsy Siegel have financed us in the Borscht Belt, and he kept financing Vegas. So all of this, people don't understand how much the tentacles of the Catskills and the Borscht Belt went out there.
Well, that's why we're here today. And I want to point out and let everybody know who's playing at home. I see the chat and there are lots of questions coming in. We're going to get them. So forgive me if I cut in or interject because we have a question that's relevant to the conversation. But I'd like to catch up on a few of these, if you don't mind. First and foremost was Grossman's. Can you please explain about Grossman's?
Grossinger's was one of the biggest hotels in the world, and they had just about everything. They were on a lake, they had golf courses, they had ski hills, they had their own airstrip at one point, and they had their own post office with a postal code. And in the bottom of Grossinger's, for example, and the Concord, these were massive, what they call fortress hotels, was a whole shopping center. So you had all of these things going on, incredible amounts of activity, massive dining rooms, massive nightclub. You're dealing with thousands of people at a time. If you could imagine our little, Irvington hotel, which you had between 350 and 550 guests, depending upon, the weekend. We would serve those people 3 meals a day, 4 meals a day, including the cocktail party, every day of the week. Well, I want you to imagine the Concord, which had over 3,000 people a day, and serving all of that at once. That's a hell of a lot of pickles.
Oh yeah.
You would see in the, you would see in the kitchen.
Peter, Bart, can you tell us a little? Does the name Jerry Weiss mean anything to you?
It does, but if you're going to ask me names at this age, why don't you ask me what day of the week it is? Not fair, Cal.
He was at Gross Singers, and he was the talent booker.
He was a talent booker. Okay. I was at Gross Singers for 1 year, most of the year, when I was in high school. As a photographer, I worked for the Tunics, who took over much of the photo concessions to most of the hotels. And with them, I also worked at a number of different hotels, the Raleigh, the Windsor, shooting those pics. But I remember many Friday nights, Saturday mornings, Saturday nights, Sunday mornings, Sunday afternoons, sitting down there selling those photographs and listening to Lou, I think his name was, do Sexy Simon Says.
Goldstein.
Lou Goldstein, yeah.
It's interesting because you talk about, go back to the talent bookers. Probably the most iconic one was Phil Greenwald at the Concord, and there's this wonderful picture of Phil Greenwald, very very ordinary looking guy in a business suit with the dark framed glasses, holding two telephones up like this, and those are you had those big black telephones with the push buttons for multiple lines. If you look at the talent scouts and going back to the talents. There never has been a venue or multiple venues where upcoming artists could practice their trade. Some of the smaller houses, and Bart will remember, we used to call them the 250 houses. You'd get kids who were 17, 18 years old, just at or above the age of consent, because you had some late shows where the young ladies took everything off, so you had to be careful. These were kids who sang a little bit at their bar mitzvahs. They may have taken some piano lessons. And all of a sudden, they're cutting shows. They're getting these charts that would go from one end of the piano to the other. And we're all adults. At the beginning of the summer, they were shitting square bricks. And by the end of the summer, they could literally do this with their eyes closed. So there's never been that kind of venue where you could do that. The story of Jan Pierce, the great opera star of the 40s and 50s, who was playing the violin for Alexander Olshanetsky, who was the band leader at the President Hotel. And all of a sudden, here this short, nondescript little Jewish guy with a barrel chest belted out this voice, this magnificent tenor voice. And the story goes how Olshanetsky, said to him, Boychik, play a little bit less the violin and sing a little bit more. Robert Merrill at Young's Gap Hotel, who would say Ma Holder was a tyrant. The Holders were the owners, but even in being a tyrant, Ma Holder would say, listen, tumble a little bit less and sing a little bit more. So they just started in these nondescript ways, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And they improved. They started up here. They built the firmest of foundations, and they took those skills as the venues, as Vegas came into being, as cruise ships came into being. They took those things. Jack Wakefield, my friend and neighbor of mine, opened for pretty much every big show. And he continued way on to his later years because of the skills he learned.
Well, Jackie was wonderful. My parents were good friends with him. I even took his daughter out just once. She was smarter than I was.
They were they had a group also, the M&Ms.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about starting, kids starting out. That was Jerry Lewis's story. That was how he, went through the Browns and the rest of it. So there were so many of them. And I remember many of them in the early days. I remember Bob Newhart doing one of his early routines on stage. And you saw everybody. You really did. It was an education who kicked it off.
Yeah. Mel Brooks talks very fondly about his time in the mountains.
Yeah, it's an education that we just don't have for today's entertainers. I wish we did. But you are going to sink or swim within a season, and that's your career. You either make it or you move on to something else.
Well, it didn't always work that way. As I said, Red Button started at our place, and he was, I don't remember what he was doing, a bellhop or something, according to my father. And he begged my father for the opportunity to become the MC when the MC took sick and died or something. And so he got on, and my father said he didn't do that well, but later, he did fine. So, you could take your chances.
What are the Pickle Barrel Tales?
I'm sorry?
What are the Pickle Barrel Tales?
Well, A Pickle Barrel Tales is a companion book to my first book, which is A Catskill Carnival. So A Catskill Carnival is about that era and more about, centered around my life growing up in it and all the relationships that I had, which were mixed, with the Borscht Belt and the Catskills in general, not just the hotels. But Pickle Barrel Tales, I wanted to be able to collect from a lot of other people's point of view that intersected with my life, what they thought about it. So I gathered a whole bunch of tales from, relatives, from people who worked up there and, put them together. And, each of them is a nice little vignette that characterizes what that whole crazy place was like.
Peter, do you have any renderings or drawings of what the museum will be in time?
If you go on the website, there are if you go on the website www.borschtbeltmuseum.org, you can take a look at some of the renderings. In fact, the architect who's designing it paid us a visit the other day. We actually, the original plan was to begin that now, but other circumstances, notwithstanding finances, put us back. While you have it, let me narrate it. The Home Savings Bank was a Beaux Arts building built in the 1920s. The importance of it is that it was one of the few banks and lending institutions that made monies available to Jewish resort owners. Again, pre turn of the century, the area was restricted. The farmland was never particularly good. The story goes a Austro-German benefactor, Baron Maurice de Hirsch, gave seed money to Eastern European Jews to come over to the United States. They made their usual entry. They went to the Lower East Side. That was the story of Malka and Sella Grossinger. Sella Grossinger had respiratory illnesses, so his wife, and it was very matriarchal at a time when women really shouldn't have had that role. So Malka found a family friend who had a farm for sale up in Ferndale, and he went up there initially for health-related reasons. But the seed monies were given by Baron Maurice de Hirsch, and because the mainstream banks up here were not particularly friendly to Europeans, they were less friendly to Jews, even less friendlier to people of color. So the Jewish farmers had the seed money. They started their cooperative learnings. So the story of the bank was the Home Savings Bank. I remember this as a kid. It was a very creepy place, and it was filled up with these stuffy guys with three hairs that they would part, and these stuffy suits, and it had this kind of stuffy, banky smell to it. So we purchased the building in 2023, and we decided we were going to open the pop-up in the building. So the pop-up museum is on the first floor of the building. The rendering, in theory, this is what it's going to look like. We are limited by some regulations because the building itself is on the National Registry, which limits what we can do. We can't do anything to the front facade. Curiously, we're limited to, we can't take the bank vault out. So among other things, we thought that the bank vault is going to be the coffee shop that we're going to call Fort Locks when it's done. So this is an initial rendering of what the first floor will look like. There's more underground than above ground, and it's an interesting bank because there's this 150-foot long tunnel that gave me the creeps when we went in it originally. And what happened was it went where it is in Ellenville. It's right off of United States 209, which is a major route. So the idea in building the tunnel is that when the Brinks truck, the armored truck, would come with the money, they wouldn't walk in the front door. They'd go down the road a little bit, and they would go in through this tunnel. If you keep scrolling down just a tiny bit, this is the Kutcher's sign that Scott Eckers. Scott was a house singer at Kutcher's for a time. A wonderful entertainer. In fact, Dr. Scott Eckers, and he was kind enough to donate the Kutcher's sign to us, and we took the Kutcher's sign in and took a look at it, and this damn thing is going to blow up. Not only did it not blow up, we plugged it in and it lit up. We have we have our resident Billy is our resident neon master who has repaired it. So when you come in, you will see it prominently displayed right in the front on high, along with other less descript signs. We had our eye on the Irvington sign that still exists right by the front fence, but unless you have some pull or you can post bail money for me, it's probably gonna stay there. But back,
if you're gonna go take the sign and you need bail money, how about if you let me come with you? You know, dead of night, we'll go pick it up.
yeah, a couple of old gray-haired Catskill rats stealing signs in the middle of the night.
All right, that's fine, but you have to let me live stream it so that we can all watch from home. That's
Can I just add one thing? The future museum will be a lot more than just signs, ashtrays, pictures. We want future generations to come to the museum. So we're going to meet that, the generations where they are and have interactive, state-of-the-art exhibits and hands-on activities and things like that, so that at the same time, they're enjoying what they're seeing and doing, and they'll be learning about the history at the same time. Because the future of the museum is the younger generation. So we have to, keep up with them, and, we want them to keep coming back. So we have a wealth of, pictures and materials, and we're always looking for more. And one of the most, I think, important things are the stories. So we have the opportunity for people to also be able to record their stories. Cool. And now, I don't know, Bart, have you done that yet?
I have not. No, I'd be happy to.
Well, you can go on our website. There's an opportunity to do that. And I know Peter has spoken in the past and recorded his story about his Borscht Belt experience.
Question always, Bart, is whether, it's fiction or nonfiction. My grandchildren will look at me really cockeyed when I tell them some of these adventures. Robin had said that oral history project. If you come into the museum, we have a recording booth where you can do it. You can do it there, or you can do it online. I was looking just out of the corner of my eye. I think Ellen had a question about acts and entertainers that are still here. Was that the question?
Hey, there's Sid Caesar.
Yeah, they have Sid Caesar and the troops. You know what we forgot to talk about, and what was critically important during the 1920s, and in that era, which was just the end of what Sullivan, the historian John Conway, calls the Silver Age, going to the Golden Age. A big draw up here was that the hotels would put on plays. You had at the Flagler, most notably, you had Kitty Carlisle Hart, you had Moss Hart. You had a whole collection of Broadway playwrights and actors and directors who would come up here. Among the acts, you had one that sticks in my mind with Stanley Wolf Players, who instead of putting on the usual shtick show or somebody getting on singing The Impossible Dream or My Yiddish Mama, they would put on little dramatic 10-minute vignettes as part of the show. So that also was something that was very important. This is Mama Chayette at Chayette's Hotel and Shate's Hotel. I can never pronounce it right.
Well, actually, Peter, as you talked about that format for those little things popping up, folks don't realize that this all goes back to vaudeville. And though that was the vaudeville format, all kinds of little stuff popping up. Could there be anything from a juggler to, a comedian to a singer to Lord only knows what, but that was part of the gig. And that's what the Tomaszewskis set up there when they were the ones who brought in really the New York entertainers to do summer stock up there. That's how a lot of that began. I thought when you were talking about the 20s and 30s, you were going to refer to John Conway's latest column about yet another body that was fished out of Loch Sheldrake.
It's interesting. Murder Incorporated and the Jewish gangsters sent their mothers up here. That was the joke. and one hotel in particular, the Plaza in South Fallsburg, and not too far from the Plaza, Lepke Buchhalter built this big country estate. There are a couple of columns of it still remaining, but along with that, the influence of the nice Jewish boys who just killed people for a hobby up here was very extensive. There was a lot of money to be made. The Kosher Butchers Union, and I'm very politically incorrect, which was very corrupt and controlled by those Jewish gangsters. They had a gold mine up here. All the hotels, all the bungalow colonies. The other thing, the vending machines, particularly the jukeboxes, the pinball machines, and cigarette vending machines. You would have the run of the cars from the Carolinas that come up and bring bootleg cigarettes up. So they were all around, and then prior to that, you had the slot machines, and then as John so vividly describes, the bodies that were trussed up and sunk to the bottom of, most notably, Loch Sheldrake and Swan Lake, and if I'm not mistaken, there's still a couple that are on the bottom. I remember when it was in the late 1960s when one or two floated up. Imagine swimming in Loch Sheldrake, and all of a sudden, you turn around and you think it's a fish, and you see some body bobbling up with a slot machine tied to their leg. So there was a fortune to be made up here, and this was pre-Las Vegas. There was a fortune to be made up here, and it was pretty much all cash.
I want to jump in because we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to button up a few questions that have appeared. One, let's see here. Robin, could you tell us a little bit more about how you got started in your involvement in the Borscht Belt? And then we should probably resolve our conversation today. There were a number of questions asking what was the eventual fate of the Catskills. Yes. So let's, Robin, can you let us know, how did you get started?
I was going to try to share a picture. I would say this is probably how it all started. My parents actually spent their honeymoon at the Nevele. And I was just going to show you a picture of a bunch of Nevele honeymooners, including my parents, having a pajama party. I don't know how I could screen share it.
Do you have them physically, or are they on your computer? It's
on my computer.
Do you see them now? They're up? You should be able to click screen share at the bottom of the Zoom window. It's a green button, and it says screen share with a green arrow pointing up. And then you'd be able to select the window of those pictures.
Okay, I'm trying to get here.
Yep.
And I'll try to do that. But what I'll do in the meantime is so my parents actually spent their honeymoon at the Nevele. And at one time, my dad actually worked there as a bartender for a second job. Growing up, I grew up in Rockland County, so we frequently vacationed there. I even recall in our community, there were places that Jews were not allowed to partake in any country club activities. I recall a sign at a lake nearby that said Gentiles only. So we vacationed all the time in the Catskills, and I developed, an attachment. And during my college years, actually pre-college years, my dad was friendly with one of the maitre d's at the Homework Lodge Hotel, and I got a job there and worked there throughout my college years, and always had, just kept that love going, and remained in contact with a lot of the fellow staff friends that I made while working there. And at one point, a friend said to me, why don't you do this reunion for staff only? And I did that in 2019. And actually, Peter was on board helping. And from there, both Peter and I got involved with the museum project. And here we are today.
Wow.
So
thank you. And
it's been fabulous.
I know we had the question earlier about, excuse me, if you could still see acts performing up there. Unfortunately, no, that's not going to be the case. And we can transition into the fate.
At the festival, they'll be able to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, actually, only partially true. There are Charles Rapp Agency, which was a premier booker, still books up here. You've got, it's interesting because you still have some bungalow colonies that are not orthodox, Landsman's for one of them, and you still have a smattering of those entertainers who were floating around. Nowhere is near the way it used to be. In fact, if you ever have opportunity to speak with Howie Rapp or with Arnold Graham, they'll tell you they actually rented a hotel to house the acts. If you think for a moment, you had 500 plus hotels and you had over 1,000 bungalow colonies, and on Saturday night, pretty much all of them had professional shows.
It's not the Borscht Belt, but Villa Roma still exists up there.
Yeah.
And they follow a very similar format. I believe they have acts too.
Yeah, you have Doc Holliday, who for all intents and purposes is the Tumler. The only difference is he's tumling in Italian, which scrolls into another thing that we look at in the museum. The Borscht Belt is, although predominantly Jewish, if you go to parts of Green and northern Ulster, you've got the Italian Alps and the Irish Alps. And my wife, who's Italian, we would go to Friar Tuck and Villa Basilio. What was the difference? Instead of having matzo ball soup, you'd have pasta fagioli. Instead of dancing the hora, you dance the chicken dance. Instead of the women playing mahjong, they would play an Italian card game called tombola.
And you know what, Peter? I bet those Italian kids in our age bracket also didn't get the punchlines in the jokes that were said in Italian.
They didn't have a clue.
You know, there were also black Catskills, by the way.
We have that exhibit of two hotels in particular, the Utopia Lodge, which was right by Grand Mountain in Greenfield Park, and the most iconic, which was Peg Leg Bates. And the quick story is, we're sitting in a barber shop, and I know Robin Westmiller, whose family, Ruby Cohn was her father. She'll remember right next to the bakery was a barber shop. I'm in the barber shop with my parents, and in walks this big black guy with this mahogany leg. And of course, I'm running for cover. I'm terrified. And my parents say, "Oh, Peg Leg Bates." So the next thing we know, Peg, as he liked to be called, or Clay, invited us to the club. So I must have been about 10 years old. We go to the club, the country club, which was in Kerhansen. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden in walks Ella Fitzgerald. A little while later walks in Duke Ellington, and they're waiting for Lionel Hampton, who was playing a show at the Rawley. What was the difference between Peg Leg Bates and the Borscht Belt Jewish Catskills? What was the difference between Utopia Lodge? The audience was black. They all had 3 meals a day. The cuisine was different. The music was different. There was a tumler, and instead of telling Yiddish jokes, he would tell jokes that related to that audience. So it was a haven, not only for Jews but for people who were not accepted by the mainstream. Casa Susanna for cross dressers in Ulster County. People who were out of the mainstream, who may have been persecuted because of religion, race, color, creed, anything, found a refuge up here. And part of the museum initiative is to stress the importance of that. And by the way, the influx of downstate communities, a large influx of LGBTQ persons, are here because of the same thing. We can be ourselves here. We can be ourselves. Artists come up because we can create. We have the freedom to create. We have the freedom to do things that help define us and in turn contribute to society as a whole. So that's an overarching focus of the museum.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Peter. Yeah.
Thank you.
Culture. Yeah.
Well, we contributed so much to American culture, but most people are totally unaware of it. They have no idea. All these people who walk around and say, I schlepped this. Believe me, they didn't learn Yiddish from their grandparents. So, comedy in America all still follows the format that was honed in the Catskills. Wherever you go, there's a piece of us somewhere. But I applaud the museum. I think you guys are wonderful. Also, the Borscht Belt Marker Project for trying to keep, the memory of all of this, not just revive it, but keep it lively so that people understand this was fun. This was a blast.
The thing is, you're right, Bart. It was so much fun. And I like to tell people at the time, while we were having so much fun, we were making history. And I mean, it was just a time unto itself.
And there are, not to plug my own books, which is not fair, but there are wonderful books about this that can answer a lot of these questions. I love my friend Patty's book. There's Borscht Belt Boy, there's Tanya Grossinger's book. There's even the one from the plumber. I mean, there are a lot of stories about it. Most people only focus on the glitz and the glamour, the entertainment world and the super large hotels. But realize the average experience was just somebody coming up for a weekend with the family they could barely afford in a small hotel, or staying, in a rooming house, or renting a bungalow for a summer. And that was the mass of the million people every year who partook of this incredible place.
Not to mention all the romances and marriages that have come from the Borscht Belt. I personally met my husband at the Concord Hotel. Still married, very happy.
There you go. The other part of it is interesting that Bart said that when you think of the Catskills, of course, you automatically think of Concord, Grossingers, Kutchers. But the real backbone were the 250 houses, the schlock houses, whatever you wanted to call them. So Bart, you were at the Irvington, the Grand Mountain, and the Aladdin. We were the backbone because of the sheer numbers, because those were the places that were affordable to the middle class.
Correct.
I wrote a thesis when I was studying for my master's called "The Brooklyn Boys Marry the Best Girls," and basically what it tracks, part of it, people left, middle class Jews left their hot apartments in Flatbush to come up to the Catskills. And it didn't matter whether you were Max the porter or Jack the cab driver, or in my father's case, Leo the diamond cutter. Every man was a king. Every woman was a queen. The kids were little princes or princesses. Imagine an average guy, Max the porter at Coney Island Hospital, coming into the dining room and saying to the waiter, "I'll have my usual for breakfast." Or Jack the cab driver coming in and saying, "Abe, the owner, promised me an end cut for dinner Saturday night." The end cut story is good. Abe promised 200 people end cuts, and we only have 44 end cuts. So, another story. So it offered to the average person an opportunity to get out of their hot apartments, to be somebody, to feel important. The women borrow the jewelry from their mamas and borrowed the mink stoles in the middle of July. The men put on their bar mitzvah suits, took out the gold watches, put on the rings, borrowed from mommy and daddy, and they were kings. And they came in and they worked overtime and double time and triple time to afford to spend 8 or 9 or 10 weeks in this predecessor to Disneyland, and they were kings and queens.
Some of them even came up and stayed, but also worked there. Like my good buddy Ruby Oshinsky, who was a Knish man, who made the there. Okay, the Levines, who were the original blouse men, who made the round. So yeah, they had their bungalow and their family was there. And believe me, after they got done with a hard day's work, they were right there. Although most, as Peter knows, were on the Bull Express.
Could I just plug 2 events that are coming up?
Go ahead.
So from July 26th to the 28th, we're having our 2nd annual Borscht Belt Festival, which I mentioned before. And in the first weekend in November, we are having the Borscht Belt Film Festival. So people can save those dates, and we hope to see you come and visit.
Do you know when the actual museum will be completed?
We originally said 2025, but I think it'll take a little bit longer. I mean, we're in the process of still raising money, and the saying goes, it takes money to make money. And we're really looking for donors. If anyone who's watching this program wants to donate, or knows anyone that wants to donate, we'd love to hear from you. And we're looking for some significant donations to make that happen.
Darren, I think that's your cue.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, let me show you how you can learn more and participate and, of course, support the Borscht Belt Museum. Head over to borschtbeltmuseum.org. We've been sharing the links in the chat, but of course, later this week, you'll receive a follow-up email with all of these links so you can look forward to that. borschtbeltmuseum.org, as well as borschtbeltfest.org. And that's next month, not too far away. So we can make the pilgrimage up to see the Borscht Belt Fest.
I
We
see
also
they have a gift shop,
They
Darren.
do have a gift shop. That's where I am right now, and I'll put that into the chat as well. And you can sport your own Borscht Belt Fest T-shirt. May the borscht be with you.
And we've got mugs.
Oh,
We've got hats that are buried someplace in the other room.
yep.
You name it, we've got it. We have a new collection of original posters that are nicely framed, that are unique to us, that are our design. Some of you may remember sitting down on those strap chairs there and getting the imprint of the strap on your rear end. We have posters and T-shirts of those. So we're increasing that as people request. We have a lot of things happening. The real big plug is we've added about 600 square feet to our actually more. I'm sorry, about close to 900 square feet to our exhibit area. So while we're looking to the future and aggressively going after the large monies in the millions to make it look like the renderings do, it's important for us to keep the pop-up in the museum in its present stage open. And we've expanded it. We've got a food exhibit coming up, and food made the Borscht Belt go around. We are in the process of negotiating the movement of a bungalow into our backyard, which should be interesting.
Wow.
But in the interim, our archivist Alan Frischman, who was the Borscht Belt plumber, wrote those two books, has brought us all sorts of pieces of memorabilia from bungalow colonies, including the refrigerator with that thing on top of it, and the stoves that you had to light with the match and stand away from, those metal tables and those uncomfortable chairs. So we're going to have a facsimile of a bungalow, and we decided that while we're waiting for the vault to be transformed into Fort Knox, we're going to make that into a replica of a circa 1950s ugly with those strange colors deluxe room in not in the Concord or Grossingers, but in Steinhorn's Grand Mountain and Charlo's Irvington. You know what I'm talking about, the new deluxe rooms that were advertised with the tiled bath and everything like that. So those are things that are coming up. Yes, of course, the plug is we need your money. We will love you if you give us $1. We'll love you if you give us $1 million. But we need your active involvement. We need you to share your stories with us, because if not, it's going to die. And this essential slice of Americana cannot meet its demise when teenagers like Bart and I decide that it's been enough, and we're going to go up to that great kitchen in the sky and apply our stuff. So that's my.
You could go to the kitchen. I'm going to the strip show. It's okay, Peter.
Wow.
They all came up.
Boy.
They all came up with the same story, Bart. That they have disabled husbands and sick in-laws, and ordinarily they wouldn't take all their clothes off for a bunch of drunk Jews at 2:45 in the morning at some schlockhouse. And when I say everything, I mean everything, because at the tender age of 11, I scratched the paint off the glass so I could take a look at the nightclub and say, now I'm seeing the tuchus. All I need is for her to turn around. And I didn't know what I was looking at, but it was the thing that us prepubescent young men decided to do in the Catskills. So that's my plug for the whole thing.
And with that, you can support them on Facebook, follow along for updates and more information. Yes, Kendi, I see you in the chat. We're always learning something new on Monday mornings. You can also pick up a Catskill Carnival. It's on Amazon. So thank you, Bart, for joining us, as well as the Pickle Barrel Tales, his follow-up piece. You can follow all of our celebrity museums on Facebook at Celebrity Museums. We're on Instagram, of course, as well. And we're on Twitter. Dad, what are we talking about here on Twitter today? Let's take a
It's
look.
one of our favorite friends. It was her 89th birthday, and we're talking about Ruta Lee. And here she is with a few of her friends. Oh, there's Anne Margaret and Carol Burnett with Ruta.
Wow.
Yeah. And Phyllis Diller. Yeah. So she's still around.
If you didn't catch it last time, we had our interview with Ruta Lee a little while ago, and I'll put that in the chat. You can watch that interview. That's right here. Wonderful guest, very sweet, but you can see all of our videos on Celebrity Museums on YouTube. Lastly, celebritymuseums.com. Sign up for all of our programs. We're heading to the Carnival Museum, Bevan Bells, the Museum of Puppetry. Also, next week, we're talking about part 2 of Marion Davies with Laura Gabrielle. A fantastic conversation last time that certainly deserved a part 2. And you can also see everything else we have coming on. Norman Lear, Rick Sapphire is joining us. A sitcom of working women talking about Eve Arden, our Miss Brooks. Great history, great stories. If you've missed any of our past virtual road trips, our Monday mornings, you can catch up. Head over to past virtual road trips right on the top, and you can see we recently went to the Laurel and Hardy Museum, the O. Henry, Edgar Allan Poe, Walt Disney, and Peter, earlier we were talking about neon signs and having them restored.
Wow, I'm lucky.
I know. We went to the National Neon Sign Museum in Oregon. A great time.
Wow.
And the Judy Garland Museum.
And Judy Garland. Oh, there's plenty here. Yeah, I could keep scrolling, everybody.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways for you to spend your day. Wonderful conversations.
These are just incredible.
They really are. They're all around the world. And
I think we didn't really cover everything we should have. We didn't talk about the final years of the Catskills, but maybe a part 2 will be in order for some time in the near future.
That would be wonderful.
Sounds good.
I agree.
There's so much to talk about. There truly is.
Well,
and I'll make a confession. I didn't want to say it earlier, but I was one of those young comedians that ended up working for the rap agency. And I was up there throughout the 70s into the 80s. And I worked at every one of those hotels you mentioned. And I opened up for everybody from Freddie Roman and Jackie Mason and the rest of them. So I have stories I could tell you about working with those.
Fabulous.
Yeah, working with those. I was a young kid and I didn't understand. And as the years went on, the Catskills becomes part of you. And
absolutely.
It does. It becomes part of you. And I still carry all those great memories with me today.
We also just think of the things that we learned while working there or, being part of that experience. I mean, especially, I know for working, you learn time management, how to get along with people. There's just so many skills that you take with you into your future. It becomes part of you.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I started out as an opening act, and I remember they said, okay, you got to do 7 minutes. And in my mind, I'm saying, how do you time 7 minutes? But after a while, you know where 7 minutes is, and you're done. It was amazing.
I heard a 3-second story about that. In my prior life, I was a school district administrator, and one of my responsibilities was large-scale staff development. So the story goes in one place, there was no coffee. And, after listening to the BS of professional development, you got to have coffee. So I'm looking at these old familiar friends called the commercial coffee urns in the teacher's cafeteria. And here I am, dressed in the suit and the whole 9 yards. Take the jacket off as I did what I was made to be, roll up the sleeves, fill the pot with water. It's 3 up, 3 down with 3 pounds of coffee. And I remember looks on people's faces and saying, going like this. And I turned around and I said, once upon a time in a magical land called the Borscht Belt, I learned to do this and a lot of other things. Now drink the coffee and tell me what you think of the coffee. I think it's pretty damn good.
Okay.
Well,
thank you so much.
Bart, Robin, thank you all. This was a wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having us.
We're here. Come visit us. Any questions that anybody has, contact us. Come visit us. Ellenville is a blast. We've got Restaurant Row. We've got everything, you name it. And we even may be able to find a connection.
I'll tell you one little sneak preview of the festival this summer. Cousin Brucey's going to be with us.
Wow.
Yeah, I worked with him as well. It's amazing.
You can pick your friends, but you can't pick your relatives. What was the line? Something like that.
Thank
All
you
right, you
all.
have to come out for the festival, Bart.
Thank you all.
So long,
Thank you,
walk.
everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
All. Thank you so
Bye.
much.